So let's move on to our next speaker. I think we first met by some of the writing that each of us was doing. And then I had the lovely experience just, about a year and a half or so ago, that I got an announcement that an article that I had written had been cited. And that's wonderful when you think that someone might have read an article, because you send these words out and wonder, where do they go, and is anybody reading this? And I saw this article, and on the first page of the article, I was cited as one of the resources, which was quite the compliment. I said, I need to find this person. It happened that she was part of a team, and she's going to talk more about her team, but we began to connect and just, I think, wanted to continue to have conversations with one another. And then as Catherine Caney and others, Katie and I were beginning to think about themes for this year's symposium, I looked back at the research article that Josie had, she and her colleagues had published, and it fits so consistently with what we've been addressing today. And so I was delighted when I called her or texted or emailed, or I forget exactly how I did it that day, and say, any chance you would be willing to come to Minnesota for our 10th annual symposium? And I think you quickly said yes. So you have her credentials there in the program. She's now one of the professors at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, that's correct, having her Ph.D., and she's doing research with colleagues around applied communication, which certainly fits with what we're talking about today. How do we communicate more effectively, more easily, and more competently with ourselves and with our many publics? And so, welcome. Glad you're here.
I laugh because it's funny, because it's true, because we're just happy someone reads an article. And then when somebody who you've cited, like a name, reaches out, it's like it makes it come to life. So it was very exciting. So thank you so much for inviting me to come and share my research with you. This is so special and exciting. I got to go to Crescent Cove yesterday, and I got the full tour, and it was amazing. And if you have not been able to get there, go to the open house. It's magical. I was trying to explain to my husband, and he's like, you're not even making sense. And I was like, there's a wall, and there are beds, and a deer ran by, and it was like, he's like, I don't even know what's happening. So it's very special. So I encourage you to go check it out if you can. I'm originally from South Dakota, North Central, almost North Dakota. My husband is from Vermilion, South Dakota. So so when he said, you want to come to Minnesota? I was like, yes, everybody's so nice. So I got my degree at South Dakota State in communication studies, and then I went to Ohio University for my Ph.D., and there I studied Facebook memorial groups, and that was about 2008, 2009, and so I started studying how people talk about grief and death, and then from there I got hired at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. I started there in 2009, and I'm still there, I love it, and how the program is set up is I basically get to study anything I would like to within the realm of communication, and so I kept going into grief and death. And with the different communication that we study, I focus on interpersonal. And so that can involve loss of relationships, loss of health, loss of jobs, lots of different losses. And so I kept studying that. And so I do study breakups. I study parasocial losses. You know, when your favorite television or book character dies, it's okay to feel sad about that. That's a real loss. Election loss, how we feel after that. Miscarriages, disenfranchised grief, studying all those sorts of losses, and recently the loss of what you've envisioned for your future has come up. That's the loss of that's the shattered dreams that our friend Ted writes about. And so that's where that came in. And I've also conducted research on motherhood and all the work that goes into that, and all of the face work and presenting like, I'm a perfect mom, everything's great, no, my kids are perfect, and also the inequity in family work with your partner that nobody talks about. And then, happy to talk about that later, but that pops up later. So my research one of my friends, Trisha Burke, reached out to me and she said, Josie, I'm doing work on medically complex children. She does have a medically complex child, and she wanted to learn more about the communication surrounding that. And so she's a quantitative scholar, and she had a lot of qualitative data. And she said, can you help me? I'm qualitative. And I said, I would love to, because I love qualitative research. You get to hear the people's voices, and it also, I'm going to reveal something about myself. It's like reading other people's diaries. And, you know, not that I ever did that as a child, but but that's sort of what I like. And you get to really see and hear people. And so she reached out for some coding help, and we've been writing ever since. And we have 3 research projects that we've completed so far, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. And these are the 3. And the best thing I could think to do is to share our participants' voices with you as they've shared with us throughout our research. So the first is barriers and facilitators of grief when caregiving, and that's with Trisha Burke, Kristen Ferris, and Abigail Mello, and they're from Texas State University. And the same crew was part of the caregiver labor during the illness trajectory. And then our final one that we just finished like 2 weeks ago, I'm not even kidding, is coping with losses in caregiving, and that's with Trisha Burke also, and then Amanda Cooper from the University of Connecticut. And Amanda had focused on dementia caregivers, and her and Trisha got together because they realized their research was really similar, and then I got to tag along too because Trisha's great. So that's just about me. I'll just keep cracking. So I know you love your children, and I know that the providers love the children and love the parents. But it's okay to be sad sometimes. It's okay to be sad about the situation you were put in, the situation given to you. It doesn't take away the love you have. If you feel guilt, that has no place here. Get rid of that guilt. You can feel sad and happy at the same time. You've seen Inside Out? You can do both. That is based on research. That is a great movie, both of them. They're based on research, and they're amazing. And it's okay to feel happy about something else, even if there's a really terrible aspect of your life that you're dealing with at that moment in time. So really throughout all of these, when I go through the participants' voices, I just want you to know, even though other people might have it worse, your grief matters. Whatever you're going through is fine. There's no competition. There's no grief Olympics. And I'm South Dakota, so I know as well as you do that 50 below zero feels the same as 60 below zero. Same with grief. Grief is grief. So just because someone else might have it worse doesn't take away the fact that you are having a tough time. That's okay. There's plenty to go around, right? There's plenty. So I'm going to walk through some of our more interesting findings. You might hear some of your own inner thoughts in these participants. And just we'll get started. And I'm sorry if I start talking fast. I get really excited about my research, and then so we'll come back. So this study revealed that most parents of complex children experience the feeling of loss after their child's diagnosis, which activated the grieving and reframing process. So here we have shattered dreams, which is what Ted talks about a lot, abandonment of plans for a particular future, kind of a loss of what might have been. When you think about becoming parents, and this is what Dr. Lon talked about, the start of the ride, you're in line, you're ready for something, you don't know what's going to happen, and then a child that you didn't expect to have is now in your life. And you have to adjust to that and get used to that. And that comes with some shattered dreams, and that might come with a little bit of sadness. And then we'll talk about some grief, and then the facilitators and barriers to that. So grief is not a Kubler-Ross situation where it's anger, denial, bargaining. We don't follow that in academics because it doesn't make a lot of sense for most people. Grief is not linear. You do not get to the acceptance phase and then poof, you are magically healed. That's not what happens. We go back and forth. And so in grief, we go numbness and shock. We have periods of grief and reorganization. And then I'll go through some facilitators, what helps us through our grief, and some barriers, what might impede in getting us through our grief. So first with numbness and shock, typically people experience experienced shock, numbness, and disbelief immediately after their child's primary diagnosis. After any loss, it might be devoid of emotion or completely overcome with emotion. And some of the comments that we heard, it's what you see in a movie when they tell you something and you just like break down crying. And I literally was looking around and like people are talking, I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't even focus. Another person said, I felt like I was thrust into a whole different world that was very separate from my family and all my friends, and suddenly I felt very isolated. And the last one, it was so devastating, there's like another thing we have to worry about and that he has to deal with. Like it already felt like such a heavy, heavy list. Each time we'd get these diagnoses, it was just so heavy, and so to have another one slammed down on us, and then she trailed off. And that kind of occurs after each new diagnosis, each new thing, each new worry. Moving into the intense grief, and intense grief has a lot of different phases within it as well. In terms of, we start with being preoccupied with thoughts of your child's diagnosis and determined to keep that child alive and thriving. And here people want information, you're Googling, you're trying to find out as much as you want. One person said her doctor told them not to search the diagnosis, and she said, we're like, you're an idiot. We already Googled it. We Googled it when you left the room, so don't tell me not to Google it. I Googled it while you were talking because like, I want to know what this is. Another said, I'm not equipped for this. Like, I have no idea. Like, what I went to school for early childhood education. I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. And now you're in charge of a child who needs special attention. Another said, I think a lot of times it's a feeling of being trapped, like I can't escape this. This is my life now, and it hurts so bad, but I can't handle it, but I have to. And this is kind of feeling helpless, depression, isolation, unfairness, and feeling misunderstood a little bit here. Then continuing in intense grief, people are physically tired, and you've probably felt this. I curl up on the couch, put on my show, and most likely fall asleep on the couch because I'm just mentally and physically exhausted. One woman referred to her experience following her child's birth and subsequent diagnosis as being not just new parents tired, but grief tired. And then we also have changes in behavior patterns, structuring life around medical equipment, medical appointments, which we've heard a lot about today. I felt like we were in nurse training because we had to learn dosing, we had to learn how to splint an infant's leg, how to splint an arm, what materials do we need to have on hand at home for that stuff. Another said we alter things we would otherwise do as a typical family. We don't go out to restaurants. For about the last 4 years, we don't take family trips together, and we avoid parties. There's so much dynamics that go on when you have a special needs sibling and life is altered. And the last one, I have to remember to schedule that refill, and then I have to pick it up. Or, oh, we need to make sure that those supplies, like just all the overhead capacity, and then all of the doing, getting that feed ready, or getting the TPN mixed, or, all the G-tube care. And then the bath, all the stuff that you just do as a caregiver. And it is not lost on me that there are mostly women in this room. And there comes my motherhood research, all that load that you're managing and doing for everybody. So it is important to take care of yourself. We then move to reorganization, where people make sense of the world as it exists with this new information. We might reconstruct new worldviews and perceptions of ourselves, including our identity. One person said, okay, this is what's going to be our reality. Another said I had to process those emotions, come to a place of acceptance, and feel hope about her life. I did start to feel that because you start to connect with other parents, and they've got kids living with differences. It's been really powerful, shifting your entire world perspective, honestly. And last, sometimes calling comes out of crisis. My hope and dream was to provide a place where moms could be together, learn, grow, feel connected, and realize that they're not alone and they don't have to do this alone. And they're talking about finding an online community, people they can connect with. And I think this is a great place to be able to do that as well. So that's kind of the basic grief that maybe many of you have felt, kind of moved through. And so we were able to kind of identify what aided or facilitated caregivers' process or progress as they move through their grief. So first, relationships were a big facilitator, having a positive social network. One woman said, I leaned on my partner, my husband and I had this conversation of, we're in this together, We're going to do whatever it takes to get our child here safely and into the next stage. Another said, we just need to be around other moms who get it, and they don't judge you for your feelings or if you're venting or if you're complaining, or no one's giving you the cliches because they've heard them all and they know that they don't help. And so, they can just sit with your pain because they know what it's like. Medical conferences, foundations, social media were also mentioned by parents as being really helpful for gathering information, seeking advice, and just connecting with other people who have similar diagnoses. Then individual coping strategies. This might be faith, therapy, knowledge. Someone said, I have actually been going to therapy now for almost a year just to process through all this because it's so much. I think that's very important. Another said, I think recognizing that it's a journey and a process that we need to get through can give us a lot of self-grace and compassion. And I think that idea of self-grace is really important. Give yourself a break. Moms are really hard on ourselves. And so I think anytime you can give yourself a break and just say, I'm doing the best I can, I really am, that's a really positive message for yourself. And then medicine, for all the providers in the room. Finding medicine, specialists, treatments, and getting a diagnosis is helpful. It gives you a path forward. One person said, thank God for modern medicine. There are surgeries she can get. Another said, we had a path, more or less. We had specialists to see. I suddenly had a community, which was a huge, 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 huge to have a community, which I think many of you would probably agree with being here, especially. Then we have barriers, things that kind of impede grief work, make it difficult for you to do what you need to be doing mentally. The rareness of the diagnosis is a major challenge. Sometimes you don't have a path forward. If you get a diagnosis, the treatment could be difficult to receive. It's hard to get social support then because you don't have that label that you can give people, and they'll go, oh, I get that, and then here's how I know how to help you. But when you have rare illnesses, rare diseases, rare diagnoses, it's hard for people to understand that. Like, you don't even understand it, and it's hard for your social network to help you as well. One person said a lot of doctors haven't even heard it, and so you just kind of feel alone on this island. Another said, we don't want to be reassured, we want to be validated, and for it to be taken seriously so our children can get the care they need. And finally, they don't know, because if your children are healthy, you don't understand how that grief can come again and again. And we'll come back to that oscillating grief in a little bit. Provider communication can sometimes be a barrier. One woman said, in that second meeting, my husband and I both just came away like, this guy's awful, he's pompous, he's patronizing us, he's like flirting with the resident. Another said, there was zero hope offered to me, there was zero encouragement offered to me, there was no support, there were no resources offered to me. I was basically told to terminate my pregnancy. So this woman had a barrier before her child was even born. And then with continued responsibilities, as you know, life goes on. You might have other children, you have a job, you might have a partner, you gotta get groceries, your lawn needs to get mowed. And so one person said, at the same time I was having spinal headaches from the C-section, Joe was gone, that's her husband, I was in a lot of pain, and Nora was getting transferred to the NICU. So life is literally going on immediately after that C-section. And then another said, we can't just go find a random babysitter. That's not a thing, which many of you can relate to, and that's why Crescent Cove is so important, that respite care, being able to have a little time yourself, take a rest, and not feel guilty about it, so important. So this was our first article that we had, and some takeaways. Communicative resilience is key. This just helps your movement through the grieving process, and what this is, it's when you make sense of disruption in a way that makes you stronger. That's what communicative resilience is. Keep doing that. Keep talking to people, make sense of what's happening, keep talking. As a communication person, I know that's like, oh, yeah, communication, but really, keep talking, keep asking questions, keep helping each other. And then providers, be clear, provide information, and be compassionate. The majority of parents express frustration with lack of information, empathy, and knowledge from their child's medical providers. It doesn't sound like those of you in the room are this barrier, but maybe you can tell your friends at the hospitals and wherever you're working. This is to be expected with rare diagnoses, right? We don't know everything about everything, but even acknowledging, like, this is rare, I believe you. I believe that what you're saying is true, that your child is doing X, Y, Z. I don't have the answer, but I will help you find out. That's all you have to say. I don't know, but I will help. And another thing here is what's objective to you as a provider is emotional to families. It might be a no biggie surgery, it might be a small procedure. It is a full situation for the family, a full situation, especially it's all consuming. Getting to the hospital, planning out, getting the other kids taken care of, taking time off work, all that, letting family know what's going on. That's all part of the all-encompassingness of that. Also in the early stages of diagnoses, when parents are kind of trying to find footing, get an advocate, and are yearning for information, they would benefit from clear, consistent, compassionate messages. So as clear as you can be, again, the communication. And even if those answers are like, we're not sure, that's a better answer than nothing. And remember to give your parents grace. That appointment might be the last straw of that day. I mean, I have typically developing children, and I have been in that situation where it's like the last straw. What do you mean you're out of this at the grocery store? I packed these 2 kids up and got here and I can't, like, that times 87, right? So just remember, if they're grumpy at you, give them some grace. So now we recognize all of the labor involved in caregiving for a medically complex child along that illness trajectory. And Ted and Lois have alluded to this in their talk as well, all of the work you do. Providers, the parents that you deal with are juggling. And you might not be able to tell because mothers like to be perfect. And that's how we're going to show ourselves. Like, I'm a good mother, everything's together, it's fine. It's hard. Medical tasks, medicine, all sorts of different things. So first with illness management work, and these are anything that observes, prevents, or minimizes symptoms related to the diagnosis. And this might be medical tasks, giving medicine, monitoring blood sugar, physical, speech therapies, scheduling appointments, coordinating and training additional caregivers, all of the things that our other speakers have mentioned today pretty much wraps into these. One person said, if I did all the therapies and things I was expected to do every day, I would have like 27 hours of therapies. I can't leave and no one else can take care of my child, and I don't have time because I have all these therapies and I have all these appointments. Another said, you're in charge of their medical calendar and getting them to the appointments. So it's not even just the appointment itself, it's getting there, making them, scheduling them, figuring out when you can go. And the hardest part really was finding out all the things you have to go through for healthcare, financing for insurance to get those things paid for. So on top of all that, you also have to worry about the money aspect. And then in biographical work, these are efforts to manage your identity that arises from the illness or diagnosis. When we enact identity-related tasks, these kind of stem from our desire to understand our transformed identities. So being a parent to a medically complex child might impact your identity a bit. Labels that our participants have given to themselves were protective, mama bear, advocate, special needs parent, teacher, therapist, devoted, and care coordinator. And one called herself a cruise ship director. One said motherhood's heavy enough, and then you throw in all these other things, and now you have to be, mom and nurse and advocate. Another said I was not only his mom, but I was his teacher, his therapist. I was his occupational therapist, his advocate, his program intervention manager. I became the ultimate super autism mom, and the problem was that I completely lost myself. I was burnt out, I was overwhelmed, and I basically lost my identity. My identity was being my son's caregiver, but that was it. I completely lost myself. And then the last one says, it was in that moment I decided enough's enough. It's time to take care of my life, and it's time to reclaim my physical and my mental health. This is me. And I just love that feeling of when you get a break from being the role of wife or mother or whatever, and you just get to be yourself. And you should not feel guilty at all for that. With everyday work life, this is the juggling man. These are like routines, labor, enabling a household to remain functional as life keeps going. These are mundane and daily tasks like running errands, cooking, cleaning, dealing with finances, yard work, making your own doctor's appointments and going to them, and just traveling for work maybe. One says when you're in the thick of appointments and hospitalizations and just kind of processing trauma, like something so basic as what are we going to eat, I think it just feels so overwhelming. These types of things may seem simple or really hard for us to do. Another said it's hard when you have two siblings and one of them has life-threatening needs. You don't have much of a choice, but your typically developing child has life-threatening needs too, in the sense that you don't want them to grow up and have an eating disorder or a substance abuse problem or bad relationships. It's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. And then moving to communication work. These are interactive forms of work that include information seeking and sharing, and active communication work maybe to educate others, educate their own child, and then also educating doctors about their child's diagnosis and any associated challenges that come with them. One person said, we originally started her Facebook page just to keep our friends and family informed. It was too daunting to have 30 text messages and emails to answer every day, every week. Another said, when meetings started involving my son, I found that I could speak up in a room filled with ICU doctors without a shred of self-doubt. And then one said, we're going to be her voice for now until she can kind of formulate a way to have her own voice, especially when it comes to educating others. Face work is kind of a part of communication work, and that's what I'll talk about next. Face work is managing perceptions and expectations. It's how you present yourself, and you want people to think that you're a good person. And we have positive and negative face work that we engage in. Positive face work is our need for acceptance and appreciation and approval from other people. Some of the quotes with this, I was starting to not be able to keep it together, and for some reason I just really didn't want to lose it right in front of the doctor and nurses. We also might have some pressure to keep that house spotless when we have in-home health care. One person said, I don't like that people see me as a superhuman that can just do whatever and be totally fine, because that's not what's going on. And they do face work for their kids as well. My hope is that one day they'll see Nora like everyone else. Like, we have encountered a few things where, people point and stare and treat people with differences, not always in the nicest way. And then the negative face work is just when you're trying to get more autonomy, privacy, and independence. So example, I think it just stems from motherhood myths that we have to give every ounce of energy and time and focus to our families. And if we don't, we feel guilty because we believe that message. So if we believe we can't find joy or peace or fun outside of our families, we're not allowed to, because it should be all about the family, and then we're going to feel guilty. And I know probably all of us have felt like this at one point or another, but again, it is okay to take care of yourself. Another said, I have a natural tendency to be like, I don't want to burden anyone with this, or they're going to judge me and think I'm weak, or this is just too heavy for them. We kind of protect other people by saying this, they're not going to be able to handle this, I don't want to talk about it. And the last one says, we carry a lot of this within ourselves. And a lot of it just feels too heavy or too big or too complex to share. And one thing with face work that I'll kind of share now with providers is when you have news about the child, you should tell the parents about it not in front of the child, regardless of age, like up to 18 months or so. After they get past that, they start to understand and know what they're talking about. And the parents need to hear the information first, so they can process it, manage their face, figure out how they're going to talk to their child about it, and go from there. But if you get the news in front of your kid and you're like, oh, the child also gets nervous. Like, mom and dad are freaking out. What's happening? So give that time, the gift of time, to parents. And Lois talked a lot about this as well. That include the child if you are going to talk to them. Say, hey, here's what's going on. Do you have anything else you want to add? And if they might not be able to respond, if they're nonverbal, feeling included in that conversation is important. And then we move to coping work, which is what we're doing now. We're trying to learn more about this. So this is any labor involved with managing stress, cognitions, and emotions associated with being a caregiver. One person said, I always have swirling thoughts, remembering past traumas, fearing the future, worrying about finances, etc. But if you find tools to center yourself and be present, everything else fades away. Another says, there's traumatizing things happening still. It's trying to beat this race. I feel like getting it down just enough so I can pile more trauma back on. And compassion fatigue is a real thing, and I don't want to burn out because then I'm no good to you. So I think that's really important to keep in mind as well. So some takeaways from this: self-care is important work. You're doing a lot of work, caregivers. It's okay to give yourself a break sometimes. It's okay to ask for help. And this quote, I wanted to include it because it's so great. It's looking at yourself and valuing yourself and recognizing that you are worth investing in because you are the caregiver, and this is a long journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint, like we've heard. And for providers, do what you can to help lighten the load. Do your best to facilitate stacked appointments if possible, stacked procedures, scheduling them close to each other. And if you're not in charge of that, if you can talk to the scheduler or whoever is in charge of that and explain to them that if the parents only have to get their kid out of the house once that day or once that week, that's really, really helpful. Instead of coming to your place Monday and then you gotta come back on Thursday and then again next Wednesday, we can just get everything kind of in the same time. That would be really helpful to the parents. And also helping the parents get hooked up with parent-to-parent connections and resources. Kind of doing that legwork for them if you can, so they don't have to go on and Google everything and figure out who a community can be. You can give them some of those resources, or even search terms, so they can plug those in and find them themselves. So that is caregiver labor, and I can't even tell you how much it hurts my heart to take all of the participant voices that we've heard and shove them into this tiny PowerPoint to share with you. If you want to know more about anything anybody says, I will talk to you for hours. Because I love talking about my research. And then the last research project that we did, that we just finished, was coping with the losses in caregiving. There are a lot of losses, lots of grief. We experience losses throughout the day of anything. During COVID, I always talked about, it's okay to grieve the small losses. During the lockdown, a lot of TV shows halted production, and then we had the writer's strike, and that little bit of normalcy went away. And people were like, I feel bad being sad that my TV show's not on. When people are dying, people are losing their health, there's all these things going on. It's okay to feel sad about something that was important to you, that would have made you just feel a little bit better, reduced your anxiety, taken it down a notch. It's okay to be sad about that. And so we talk about the dual process model of coping with bereavement that Ted kind of gave you a little precursor to, a little snapshot. So I'm going to just kind of basically describe this model, and then I'll give you some examples of how we engage in grief like this. Like really smushy water. I'm very strong. So we have the loss orientation, and then we have the restoration orientation, and I'll go through each of those in a second. And what we do is we oscillate between them. We boing back and forth. Sometimes we're feeling lost, sometimes we're feeling more restored. And you do that throughout your life. There's no stopping. And that's why that Kubler-Ross model is not something that we follow, because we don't actually follow it in real life. So focusing on the loss-oriented aspect, this is where we have expectations for the child, right? And you grieve because even if we're so incredibly in love with our son, we still grieve the loss of our dreams we have for the child and what could have been. Another said, you need to grieve the loss of the kid you thought you were going to have because that's such a huge expectation. There have been times where I've felt like I wasn't able to be the mom. My care for him was putting in NG tubes, dealing with his oxygen, and talking to doctors. I didn't feel like we had a baby time where you're just cuddling or playing or whatever. And I'm still coming to grips with being at peace with who he is and who he's going to be, because it's still shaking my core image of what I had envisioned for my life and for myself in kind of a selfish way, like what I thought I'd be doing once my kids were older, possibly out of the house kind of thing. So you have expectations for your child, and you also have expectations for being a parent, and those are shattered at this point. And then we move to the restoration orientation. Caregivers, ROs, involved moving beyond feelings of loss to transform expectations and adjust to new circumstances. Reframing, perspective taking, self-growth, finding a new normal are all parts of this. And different aspects, we found that people reframed within this orientation, appreciating small or simple things, see the silver lining, or value the higher purpose. One person said, "It is difficult and it's trying, but it's also incredibly rewarding." So just kind of flipping that in your head. Perspective taking is another aspect. This one says, "I don't know, even a year ago I would have framed myself as in a caretaker role necessarily, but the hindsight's 2020, where you're like, oh my God, actually I do so much." And you kind of realize, like, I can do this, I am doing this, good for me. And then we have self-growth, how caregiving changed them, using energy to advocate for your daughter. One person said, "I think it made me a kinder person." Gave me a new perspective on things. And then finally, the new normal. And this is releasing or adjusting expectations and learning to live in the moment. It kind of helps you find your new normal. Medically complex child caregivers alter expectations for social networks as well. And one person said, "And so now we have the discussions of what does his future look like outside of just the medical. Okay, we've got that taken care of. What does this mean? What kind of schools is he going to go to? What are we going to do? Can we get a pet?" You know, you start to kind of think of like what your life is looking at like now. So back to the DPM, and that oscillation is what we're going to focus on, because I think this is the most exciting part of the research that we found. Oscillation is transitioning to the loss orientation or the restoration orientation, and then within each orientation, you can kind of wiggle back and forth to either avoiding or confronting that. And triggers are typically thought of as what makes the oscillation go. You see something and you get triggered to the grief, or you see something, you get triggered to restoration. And we usually think of those as very passive. I saw it in the environment, I heard a song, I ate a meal, it reminded me of that. And what we found is you can actually be intentional to trigger yourself to one or the other. Which is kind of exciting to a nerd like me. Very exciting. And so in terms of the loss orientation triggers, what triggers people to go to that loss? And there were 4 major themes here. The first was health, the health of the child. We'll think we're in a good spot, and then something will come up, and we're like, oh shit, that wasn't on my radar. Like out of nowhere, you're like, oh crap. Another one says, the first time she had a seizure, it was one of those things where we knew it was possible with her condition, but we just didn't expect it. So those, anything health, new symptom, new diagnosis, new anything. Lack of appropriate social support is also something that triggers people to the loss orientation. Diminishing, failing to understand the situation, encountering challenges, emotions, or the illness or diagnosis itself falls here because people are constantly educating others. One person said people didn't just understand it, and it gets exhausting. It's exhausting to constantly be like, oh yeah, thanks for including us, but we can't come to a small gathering in the middle of flu and cold season. Another said, or when people try to tell me that things were gonna be okay, hey, he's gonna be a gymnast, don't you worry about this. I just wanna shout like, GTFO, like you have no idea what you're talking about. And this can also include other people's reactions to your child, how they present physically, or their behaviors toward your child. It's that lack of social support. Normal people problems were another trigger. One person said, I was around good people who were living the same life I was living a while ago, but they were crying because their son's going off to college in 7 years, and my son might never do that. And that was really hard for me. I couldn't relate with them anymore to an extent. One that's not on here said the comments that were normal before, normal people problems, really stung all of a sudden. And internally then, I just started withdrawing and not wanting to talk to people as much because their normal problems were too painful, because I would do anything for my child to be able to do that stuff. And these comments were not meant to be hurtful from those people. It's just one of those, just hits you. And then comparisons, comparing to other typically developing children. One person said, I got too excited. One person said, we saw the gap between her and the other kids go wider and wider as she aged. And the other quote, 2 women had babies at the same time at her workplace, and her child had Down syndrome, and the other mom had a typically developing child. And she said, I see where her daughter's at, and oh God, that's right. That's where if my child didn't have Down syndrome, that's where she would be. So just those comparisons were really troubling. And any milestones, and I think we had heard about that as well. You work so hard to get to a milestone, and then you realize, like, oh, that took a lot of effort, and that this other child, that didn't take any effort at all. And that can hit you hard. So then moving to the restoration orientation triggers, and these include reminders of a positive occurrence amidst a challenging time. We have social support, recognizing milestones, and intentionally being positive. So with social support, one person said, I feel like people in general try to be very encouraging, and so give advice that I do find helpful. That's like, you're incredible parents. Keep doing what you're doing. And I think that goes for anybody. We just want to hear we're doing a good job. So if you're looking for something to say, if you need a phrase or a script, you're doing great. That's all you have to say. You're doing a great job. Another one, somebody said to me, it's okay to grieve for the child you're not going to have, and that doesn't make you any less happy for the child you will have. Just a nice, helpful boost. Another said her nurses have been they're just like realistic cheerleaders. They don't sugarcoat. Most of them don't sugarcoat anything, which I appreciate, but yet they've all got a positive outlook. So you can give that tough news to the parents. And you don't have to be like, hey, but if you're an optimistic person, have a little positivity, a little energy, that's all the parents need. Then moving to recognizing milestones, achievements, performances, progress of any kind. Really achieve those, really appreciate those, and reward yourself when that happens. One person said, one person's child, the doctors were pointing out the positive things her daughter could do, and they said both of them immediately started pointing out things she was doing that were very positive, and I hadn't picked up on that. So the doctors really pulled me out of it, because she was so focused on the deficits. And the doctor said, hey, no, look what she's doing. This is great. And I think we need a little bit of a glimmer of hope in there sometimes. Another said, so just being there to see when that light bulb goes off, or when a milestone is reached, or a connection is made, or to see him grow in a particular way, I think those have been the highlights for me. And then finally, intentionality. You have to release the expectation, you have to release all of it, and just kind of say, we will find a way. Another said, I try to refocus on just enjoying him, loving him, and not thinking about all that other stuff. And that's seeing the person, not the diagnosis. And we get wrapped up in that sometimes, thinking about the diagnosis, and then you're like, oh, there's my perfect child. And they're so amazing, and I love them. And so just making yourself intentionally focus on that can be helpful. And so some takeaways from here. You can control your triggers. You can tell people if you do or do not want to talk about something. So you know what, I just don't want to focus on that right now. I want to have me time. I don't want to talk about the kids. And then don't feel guilty, because we're always supposed to think about our kids, right? It's okay to not always think about them. Focus on you sometimes. And you can also kind of manage or control some of the triggers you deal out to other people, and just be aware of what you're saying and how that might affect them. And it's a delicate balance. It's okay to be sad, but it's not healthy to be sad all the time. So you can trigger yourself to go to the restoration phase. Like, what are some positives? But it's also not healthy to live in the total restoration phase and not deal with the grief that you're feeling. So you do have to oscillate back and forth, and that's the healthy aspect. And then for providers, again, it's a balance. You need to give your parents facts, which might trigger them to the loss orientation, and that's fine. But you can also remind them of the progress their child has made, how strong they are. Give them something to lean on later. They might be sad or in their loss orientation in the appointment, but they'll remember what you said. They'll pop back to it when they're ready, and I think giving them something to take with them is really important. So just kind of to wrap all of it up, the grief that caregivers feel is real, and that's okay. and just acknowledging that is important. The work that caregivers engage in is extensive and all-consuming. Being a caregiver is hard work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of grief. I see you. We see you. You're doing it. And then control what you can control. Can't control everything. We try. Especially as women, we try. But you can't control everything. And if you're in the position to schedule appointments together or do anything that can lighten the load on parents, please do that. And so, lastly, keep talking to each other, come to events like this, keep learning, and I cannot thank you enough for letting me be part of your journey. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh my. We heard a personal story. We heard a medical provider's story. And now we are hearing the story of dozens, maybe even hundreds of parents and the research put it together collectively. Again, can we thank you, Josie, for coming and sharing the research, for doing the research. And to do it in that qualitative way, to hear those voices, see the voices as they came up on the screens, and not just give us some numbers about this number of parents, this number of whatevers, and so on. Thank you for that. Let's take just a moment, especially about her research or research methods for a Q&A with her, and then we're just going to take a brief stretch break and have Lois and Lon to come up, and we're going to have some Q&A with our three speakers. But if you will, and I don't know if I'll take the microphone back there, if you can use your big voice or let me see you, we'll just get a few questions if there's anything about the way that this scholar has done this kind of research and that you want to know more about that. So raise your hand so I can see you, or I'll either get a microphone to you. I have another one over here. Or something that you would like to add to what Josie said. Yes.
Thank you so much. I also love research and data. I'm curious if within this work or other works of yours you have additional information that provides scope of race, ethnicity, culture, economic background that implies other components of this as well as we consider families that we work with.
Not off the top of my head. The people involved in these studies, one of them we analyzed transcripts from an awesome podcast called The Rare Life with Madeline Cheney. If you haven't listened to it, you should. She's great. She interviews parents who have children with rare diagnoses, and they just tell their story about what's going on. And those are, offhand, there's a beautiful table in our articles, and it really does cover a wide diversity of people. And the other one was interviews with a lot of, I'm trying to think. The short answer is yes, but I don't have it with me. I guess that's.
Thank you so much, Josie. I have a question and a comment that we hear. I know, sorry, I shouldn't have. I couldn't help myself. When Jenny isn't here today, but she does our fundraising and reaches out to families that our clinical team connects her to often to ask them to share their story. And we hear donors say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you're asking. Families are so vulnerable and must be so hard. And you were doing research talking to families about their intimate lives all the time too. And we hear and are validated again and again how much families and parents want to talk about their children, and we love and appreciate and honor every word they speak, as it's so beautiful to hear and see all the quotes that you have. Do you have anything to say about that, like the willingness and the openness and the encouragement to us to keep asking to have parents share?
I think it's so cathartic, I guess, to share For the participants, that's what we've heard. It's cathartic for them to be able to tell their story and have someone listen to it, and for it to go into research to help other people. But yeah, the responses have been really positive. People always have the ability to say no, and if you're ever asked to engage in research and you do not feel it, this is avoiding a trigger. You don't have to. You can say no and you don't have to feel guilty about it. But for the most part, it's been really positive.
Just to add to that, some of the work, again, I've done in England, and some of this comes out of bereavement care, but I think it happens while there's still the living child. But parents who've had a child die yearn for people to say the child's name to them. Please say Neil to me. Please say Evan to me. Please say Susan to me. You act as if I should move on. You act as if I should not focus on this. My child is both alive and dead. Please. And they're yearning for the story to be told. And at least my experience is in working with parents who have a living child, yes, there are days they don't want to talk about it, and you said that explicitly, that they are doing restoration or they don't want to go down that hole right now. But there are other times they just want people to say, tell me a bit of what it's like to be a mom. Tell me about Johnny. Introduce me to your child. And on to treat that as Lois said this morning so well about Carly, treat me as a living person, that I still have my own thoughts and ideas and all the rest. And so I would just affirm what Katie was asking in the question with my experience of work in England. Yeah. Well, let me suggest this. I noticed that we didn't have a break on the calendar for this afternoon. We're going to go till 3 o'clock, so we just have a bit more time. Let me give you two brief choices only. One is if you need to go to the restroom, please do so in 5 minutes and be back. If you don't need to go to the restroom, would you just stand up and wiggle your bottom and give your body a bit of care? Take just a 5-minute break. Thank you.